Zimbabwe latest, Mugabe resisting calls to resign. Zimbabwe's longtime president Robert Mugabe is reportedly refusing to step down immediately, amid growing calls for his resignation. The 93-year-old was put under house arrest during a military takeover on Wednesday, after a power struggle over who would succeed him. The military said on Friday it was engaging with Mr. Mugabe. It also said it had been arresting criminals around the president but gave no names. Several senior officials are said to have been detained since Wednesday. Others are still at large, the military said. In a televised statement, the military said it would advise the nation on the outcome of talks with Mr. Mugabe as soon as possible. Opposition leader Morgan Tsvangirai said it was in the interests of the people that Mr. Mugabe resign immediately. Presentational Grey Line. The story in full. Live updates from Zimbabwe. The view from the street, any change will do. The basics, 5 things you should know about Zimbabwe. What next for Robert Mugabe? Presentational Grey Line. The army moved in after Mr. Mugabe last week sacked Vice President Emmerson Mnangagwa, signaling that he favored his wife Grace Mugabe to take over his ZANU-PF party and thus the presidency. If President Mugabe can be persuaded to step down officially, it could help legitimize the military's dramatic intervention, the BBC's Andrew Harding reports from Zimbabwe. On the streets, it is hard to find anyone who wants Mr. Mugabe to stay on, our correspondent adds, but negotiating the manner of his departure and some sort of transitional agreement to follow could take some time. So what's going on in Harare now? It is very unclear. Photos in the Zimbabwe Herald earlier showed Mr. Mugabe meeting Army Chief Gen Constantino Chiwenga and the 2 envoys from the Southern African Development Community, SADC, at State House in Harare. Alongside them was Father Fidelis Mukanori, a Roman Catholic priest known to Mr. Mugabe for years, who has been brought in to mediate. Sources close to the talks say Mr. Mugabe, who has been in control of Zimbabwe since it threw off white minority rule in 1980, is refusing to stand down voluntarily before next year's planned elections. I think he is trying to buy time, one source close to the army leadership told the AFP news agency. Some observers suggest that Mr. Mugabe may be trying to seek guarantees of safety for himself and his family before stepping aside. ZANU-PF officials had earlier suggested Mr. Mugabe could remain nominally in power until the party congress in December, when Mr. Mnangagwa would be formally installed as party and national leader. The Mugabes and other key players in profile. On Friday, the UK Embassy stopped advising UK citizens in Zimbabwe to stay at home but said they should still take sensible precautions, including avoiding political activity and not taking pictures of soldiers on the streets. What do South Africa and the region want? South Africa is hosting millions of Zimbabweans who fled after the country's economy crashed in 2008. It has a special interest in seeing stability restored. South African Defence Minister Nosiviwe Mafuseni and State Security Minister Bongani Bongo are the envoys meeting Mr. Mugabe on behalf of SADC, which South Africa currently leads. SADC also held a meeting in neighbouring Botswana and called for a regional summit to discuss the crisis. They urged Zimbabwe to settle the political challenges through peaceful means, the AFP news agency reports. The African Union said it would not accept a military seizure of power. OHED and Guinea President Alpha Conde said he was inviting the army to return to its barracks and return to constitutional order. And Zimbabwe's opposition? Mr. Tsvangirai, head of the Movement for Democratic Change Tsvangirai, MDCT, party and the main opposition leader in Zimbabwe, said Mr. Mugabe's immediate resignation must be part of a negotiated all-inclusive transitional mechanism. He said this should lead to comprehensive reforms for free and fair elections to be held, views echoed by another opposition leader, Tendai Biti. What's happened to Grace Mugabe? Early reports suggested Ms. Mugabe had fled to Namibia, but sources now say she is in the family compound in Harare, along with some of the youth wing of ZANU-PF who had backed her. On Wednesday, one of her key allies, Kujai Chipanga, made a televised apology for criticizing the head of the army as a war of words raged prior to the military takeover. Mr. Chipanga is thought to be in army custody but insisted his statement was voluntary. Other senior members of the youth wing have also reportedly been detained. Presentational gray line. You may also want to read. What next for Robert Mugabe? Why did the army act now? How to tell if you are in a coup. Presentational gray line. How did the military takeover come about? In the early hours of Wednesday, Zimbabwe's military took over the headquarters of national broadcaster ZBC and issued a statement saying they were targeting criminals around President Mugabe. Troops in armored vehicles encircled parliament and other key buildings throughout the day. On Monday, Gen Chiwenga had warned the army would intervene to end what he called the purging of ZANU-PF members with a liberation background, referring to the country's struggle for independence. Mr. Mnangagwa is one such veteran of the 1970s war which led to independence.